This is Section 49 of Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain, Section 49, The Sacramento Daily Union, April, 1866, Part 3. The San Francisco Daily Union, April 20th, 1866. Honolulu, March, 1866. Board and lodging secured. I did not expect to find as comfortable a hotel as the American, with its large, airy, well-furnished rooms, distinguished by perfect neatness and cleanliness, its cool, commodious verandas, its excellent table, its ample front yard, carpeted with grass and adorned with shrubbery, etc., and so I was agreeably disappointed. One of our lady passengers from San Francisco, who brings high recommendations, has purchased a half interest in the hotel, and she shows such a determination to earn success that I heartily wish she may achieve it, and the more so because she is an American, and if common remark can be depended upon, the foreign element here will not allow an American to succeed if a good strong struggle can prevent it. Several of us have taken rooms in a cottage in the center of town, and are well satisfied with our quarters. There is a grassy yard as large as Platt's Hall on each of the three sides of the premises. A number of great tamarind and algaroba trees tower above us, and their dense, wide-spreading foliage casts a shade that palls our verandas with a sort of solemn twilight, even at noonday. If I were not so fond of looking into the rich masses of green leaves that swathe the stately tamarind right before my door, I would idle less and write more, I think. The leaf of this tree is of the size and shape of that of our sickly, homely locust in the States, but the tamarind is as much more superb a tree than the locust as a beautiful white woman is more lovely than a digger squaw who may chance to generally resemble her in shape and size. The algaroba (my spelling is guesswork) has a gnarled and twisted trunk, as thick as a barrel, far-reaching crooked branches, and a delicate feathery foliage which would be much better suited to a garden shrub than to so large a tree. We have got some handsome mango trees about us also, with dark green leaves as long as a goose quill and not more than twice as broad. The trunk of this tree is about 6 inches through, and is very straight and smooth. 5 feet from the ground it divides into 3 branches of equal size, which bend out with a graceful curve and then assume an upright position. From these numerous smaller branches spout. The main branches are not always 3 in number, I believe, but ours have this characteristic at any rate. We pay from $5 to $7 a week for furnished rooms, and $10 for board. Further particulars in this connection. Mr. Lawler, an American, and well spoken of, keeps a restaurant where meals can be had at all hours, so you see that folks of both regular and eccentric habits can be accommodated in Honolulu. Washing is done chiefly by the natives, price $1 a dozen. If you are not watchful, though, your shirt won't stand more than 1 washing, because Kanaka artists work by a most destructive method. They use only cold water, sit down by a brook, soap the garment, lay it on one rock, and pound it with another. This gives a shirt a handsome fringe around its borders, but it is ruinous on buttons. If your washerwoman knows you will not put up with this sort of thing, however, she will do her pounding with a bottle, or else rub your clothes clean with her hands. After the garments are washed the artist spreads them on the green grass, and the flaming sun and the winds soon bleach them as white as snow. They are then ironed on a cocoa-leaf mat spread on the ground, and the job is finished. I cannot discover that anything of the nature of starch is used. Board, lodging, clean clothes, furnished room, coal oil or whale oil lamp (dingy, greasy, villainous). Next you want water, fruit, tobacco, and cigars, and possibly wines and liquors, and then you are fixed, and ready to live in Honolulu. Water. The water is pure, sweet, cool, clear as crystal, and comes from a spring in the mountains, and is distributed all over the town through leaden pipes. You can find a hydrant spiriting away at the bases of 3 or 4 trees in a single yard, sometimes, so plenty and cheap is this excellent water. Only $24 a year supplies a whole household with a limitless quantity of it. Fruit. You must have fruit. You feel the want of it here. At any rate I do, though I cared nothing whatever for it in San Francisco. You pay about 25 cents, 2 reals in the language of the country, borrowed from Mexico, where a good deal of their silver money comes from, a dozen for oranges, and so delicious are they that some people frequently eat a good many at luncheon. I seldom eat more than 10 or 15 at a sitting, however, because I despise to see anybody gourmandize. Even 15 is a little surprising to me, though, for 2 or 3 oranges in succession were about as much as I could ever relish at home. Bananas are worth about a bit a dozen, enough for that rather overrated fruit. Strawberries are plenty and as cheap as the bananas. Those which are carefully cultivated here have a far finer flavor than the California article. They are in season a good part of the year. I have a kind of general idea that the tamarinds are rather sour this year. I had a curiosity to taste these things, and I knocked half a dozen off the tree and ate them the other day. They sharpened my teeth up like a razor, and put a wire edge on them that I think likely will wear off when the enamel does. My judgment now is that when it comes to sublimated sourness, persimmons will have to take a back seat and let the tamarinds come to the front. They are shaped and colored like a peanut, and about 3 times as large. The seeds inside of the thin pod are covered with that sour, gluey substance which I experimented on. They say tamarinds make excellent preserves, and by a wise provision of Providence they are generally placed in sugar-growing countries, and also that a few of them placed in impure water at sea will render it palatable. Mangoes and guavas are plenty. I do not like them. The limes are excellent, but not very plenty. Most of the apples brought to this market are imported from Oregon. Those I have eaten were as good as bad turnips, but not better. They claim to raise good apples and peaches on some of these islands. I have not seen any grapes or pears or melons here. They may be out of season, but I keep thinking it is dead summer time now. Cigars. The only cigars smoked here are those trifling, insipid, tasteless, flavorless things they call Manillas, 10 for 25 cents, and it would take 1,000 to be worth half the money. After you have smoked about $35 worth of them in a forenoon, you feel nothing but a desperate yearning to go out somewhere and take a smoke. They say high duties and a sparse population render it unprofitable to import good cigars, but I do not see why some enterprising citizen does not manufacture them from the native tobacco. A Kanaka gave me some Oahu tobacco yesterday, of fine texture, pretty good flavor, and so strong that one pipeful of it satisfied me for several hours. This man Brown has just come in and said he has bought a couple of tons of Manillas to smoke tonight. Wines and liquors. Wines and liquors can be had in abundance, but not of the very best quality. The duty on brandy and whiskey amounts to about $3 a gallon, and on wines from 30 to 60 cents a bottle, according to market value. And just here I would caution Californians who design visiting these islands against bringing wines or liquors with their baggage, lest they provoke the confiscation of the latter. They will be told that to uncork the bottles and take a little of the contents out will compass the disabilities of the law, but they may find it dangerous to act upon such a suggestion, which is nothing but an unworthy evasion of the law at best. It is incumbent upon the custom officers to open trunks and search for contraband articles, and although I think the spirit of the law means to permit foreigners to bring a little wine or liquor ashore for private use, I know the letter of it allows nothing of the kind. In addition to searching a passenger's baggage, the custom-house officer makes him swear that he has got nothing contraband with him. I will also mention, as a matter of information, that a small sum, $2 for each person, is exacted for permission to land baggage, and this goes to the support of the hospitals. I have said that the wines and liquors sold here are not of the best quality. It could not well be otherwise, as I can show. There seem to be no hard, regular drinkers in this town, or at least very few. you perceive that the duties are high. Saloon keepers pay a license of $1,000 a year. They must close up at 10 o'clock at night, and not open again before daylight the next morning. They are not allowed to open on Sunday at all. These laws are very strict and are rigidly obeyed. Water again. I must come back to water again, though I thought I had exhausted the subject, as no ice is kept here, and as the notion that snow is brought to Honolulu from the prodigious mountains on the island of Hawaii is a happy fiction of some imaginative writer, the water used for drinking is usually kept cool by putting it into monkeys and placing those animals in open windows, where the breezes of heaven may blow upon them. Monkeys are slender-necked, large-bodied, gourd-shaped earthenware vessels, manufactured in Germany, and are popularly supposed to keep water very cool and fresh, but I cannot endorse that supposition. If a wet blanket were wrapped around the monkey, I think the evaporation would cool the water within, but nobody seems to consider it worth while to go to that trouble, and I include myself among this number. Ice is worth $100 a ton in San Francisco, and $500 or $600 here, and if the steamer continues to run, a profitable trade may possibly be driven in the article hereafter. It does not pay to bring it from Sitka in sailing vessels, though. It has been tried. It proved a mutinous and demoralizing cargo, too, for the sailors drank the melted freight and got so high-toned that they refused ever afterwards to go to sea unless the captains would guarantee them ice water on the voyage. Brown got the latter fact from Captain Phelps, and says he "coppered it in consideration of the source." To copper a thing, he informs me, is to bet against it. Etiquette. If you get into conversation with a stranger in Honolulu, and experience that natural desire to know what sort of ground you are treading on by finding out what manner of man your stranger is, strike out boldly and address him as Captain. Watch him narrowly, and if you see by his countenance that you are on the wrong tack, ask him where he preaches. It is a safe bet that he is either a missionary or captain of a whaler. I am now personally acquainted with 72 captains and 96 missionaries. The captains and ministers form one half of the population. The third fourth is composed of common Kanakas and mercantile foreigners and their families, and the final fourth is made up of high officers of the Hawaiian government, and there are just about cats enough for 3 apiece all around. A solemn stranger met me in the suburbs yesterday, and said, "Good morning, your reverence. Preach in the stone church yonder, no doubt?" "No, I don't. I'm not a preacher." "Really? I beg your pardon, Captain. I trust you had a good season. How much oil—" "Oil? Why, what do you take me for? I'm not a whaler." "Oh, I beg 1,000 pardons, your Excellency. Major General in the household troops, no doubt. Minister of the Interior, likely. Secretary of War? First Gentleman of the Bedchamber. Commissioner of the Royal—" "Stuff, man, I'm no official. I'm not connected in any way with the government." "Bless my life, then who the mischief are you? What the mischief are you? And how the mischief did you get here, and where in thunder did you come from?" "I'm only a private personage, an unassuming stranger, lately arrived from America." "No! Not a missionary, not a whaler, not a member of His Majesty's government, not even Secretary of the Navy. Ah, heaven! It is too blissful to be true. Alas, I do but dream. And yet that noble, honest countenance, those oblique, ingenuous eyes, that massive head, incapable of anything. Your hand, give me your hand, bright waif. Excuse these tears. For 16 weary years I have yearned for a moment like this, and—" Here his feelings were too much for him, and he swooned away. I pitied this poor creature from the bottom of my heart. I was deeply moved. I shed a few tears on him, and kissed him for his mother. I then took what small change he had, and shoved. Mark Twain. The Sacramento Daily Union, April 21, 1866. Honolulu, March, 1866. Coming home from prison. I am probably the most sensitive man in the kingdom of Hawaii tonight, especially about sitting down in the presence of my betters. I have ridden 15 or 20 miles on horseback since 5 p.m., and to tell the honest truth, I have a delicacy about sitting down at all. I am one of the poorest horsemen in the world, and I never mount a horse without experiencing a sort of dread that I may be setting out on that last mysterious journey which all of us must take sooner or later, and I never come back in safety from a horseback trip without thinking of my latter end for 2 or 3 days afterward. This same old regular devotional sentiment began just as soon as I sat down here 5 minutes ago. An excursion to Diamond Head and the King's Cocoanut Grove was planned today. Time 4:30 p.m. The party to consist of half a dozen gentlemen and 3 ladies. They all started at the appointed hour except myself. I was at the government prison, and got so interested in its examination that I did not notice how quickly the time was passing. Somebody remarked that it was 20 minutes past 5 o'clock, and that woke me up. It was a fortunate circumstance that Captain Phillips was there with his turnout, as he calls a top buggy that Captain Cook brought here in 1778, and a horse that was here when Captain Cook came. Captain Phillips takes a just pride in his driving and in the speed of his horse, and to his passion for displaying them I owe it that we were only 16 minutes coming from the prison to the American Hotel, a distance which has been estimated to be over half a mile. But it took some awful driving. The captain's whip came down fast, and the blows started so much dust out of the horse's hide that during the last half of the journey we rode through an impenetrable fog, and ran by a pocket compass in the hands of Captain Fish, a whaler captain of 26 years' experience, who sat there through that perilous voyage as self-possessed as if he had been on the euchre deck of his own ship, and calmly said, "Port your helm, port," from time to time, and "Hold her a little free steady, so," and "Luff, hard down to starboard," and never once lost his presence of mind or betrayed the least anxiety by voice or manner. When we came to anchor at last, and Captain Phillips looked at his watch and said, "16 minutes! I told you it was in her. That's over 3 miles an hour," I could see he felt entitled to a compliment, and so I said I had never seen lightning go like that horse. And I never had. The steed Oahu. The landlord of the American said the party had been gone nearly an hour, but that he could give me my choice of several horses that could easily overtake them. I said never mind, I preferred a safe horse to a fast one. I would like to have an excessively gentle horse, a horse with no spirit whatever, a lame one, if he had such a thing. Inside of 5 minutes I was mounted and perfectly satisfied with my outfit. I had no time to label him, "This is a horse," and so if the public took him for a sheep I cannot help it. I was satisfied, and that was the main thing. I could see that he had as many fine points as any man's horse, and I just hung my hat on one of them, behind the saddle, and swabbed the perspiration from my face, and started. I named him after this island, Oahu, pronounced O-wow-hoo. The first gate he came to he started in. I had neither whip nor spur, and so I simply argued the case with him. He firmly resisted argument, but ultimately yielded to insult and abuse. He backed out of that gate and steered for another one on the other side of the street. I triumphed by my former process. Within the next 600 yards he crossed the street 14 times and attempted 13 gates, and in the meantime the tropical sun was beating down and threatening to cave the top of my head in, and I was literally dripping with perspiration and profanity. I am only human, and I was sorely aggravated. I shall behave better next time. He quit the gate business after that and went along peaceably enough, but absorbed in meditation. I noticed this latter circumstance, and it soon began to fill me with the gravest apprehension. I said to myself, this malignant brute is planning some new outrage, some fresh deviltry or other. No horse ever thought over a subject so profoundly as this one is doing, just for nothing. The more this thing preyed upon my mind, the more uneasy I became, until at last the suspense became unbeatable, and I dismounted to see if there was anything wild in his eye, for I had heard that the eye of this noblest of our domestic animals is very expressive. I cannot describe what a load of anxiety was lifted from my mind when I found out that he was only asleep. I woke him up and started him into a faster walk, and then the inborn villainy of his nature came out again. He tried to climb over a stone wall, 5 or 6 feet high. I saw that I must apply force to this horse, and that I might as well begin first as last. I plucked a stout switch from a tamarind tree, and the moment he saw it, he gave in. He broke into a convulsive sort of a canter, which had 3 short steps in it and 1 long one, and reminded me alternately of the clattering shake of the great earthquake and the sweeping plunging of the Ajax in a storm. Out of prison, but in the stocks. And now it occurs to me that there can be no fitter occasion than the present to pronounce a fervent curse upon the man who invented the American saddle. There is no seat to speak of about it. One might as well sit in a shovel. And the stirrups are nothing but an ornamental nuisance. If I were to write down here all the abuse I expended on those stirrups, it would make a large book, even without pictures. Sometimes I got one foot so far through that the stirrup partook of the nature of an anklet, sometimes both feet were through, and I was handcuffed by the legs, and sometimes my feet got clear out, and left the stirrups wildly dangling about my shins. Even when I was in proper position and carefully balanced upon the balls of my feet, there was no comfort in it, on account of my nervous dread that they were going to slip one way or the other in a moment. But the subject is too exasperating to write about. About horses and Kanaka shrewdness. This is a good time to drop in a paragraph of information. There is no regular livery stable in Honolulu, or indeed in any part of the kingdom of Hawaii. Therefore, unless you are acquainted with wealthy residents, who all have good horses, you must hire animals of the vilest description from the Kanakas. Any horse you hire, even though it be from a white man, is not often of much account, because it will be brought in for you from some ranch, and has necessarily been leading a hard life. If the Kanakas who have been caring for him, inveterate riders they are, have not ridden him half to death every day themselves, you can depend upon it they have been doing the same thing by proxy, by clandestinely hiring him out. At least, so I am informed. The result is that no horse has a chance to eat, drink, rest, recuperate, or look well or feel well, and so strangers go about in the islands mounted as I was today. In hiring a horse from a Kanaka you must have all your eyes about you, because you can rest satisfied that you are dealing with as shrewd a rascal as ever patronized a penitentiary. You may leave your door open and your trunk unlocked as long as you please, and he will not meddle with your property. He has no important vices, and no inclination to commit robbery on a large scale. But if he can get ahead of you in the horse business, he will take a genuine delight in doing it. This trait is characteristic of horse jockeys the world over, is it not? He will overcharge you if he can. He will hire you with a fine-looking horse at night, anybody's, maybe the king's, if the royal steed be in convenient view, and bring you the mate to my Oahu in the morning, and contend that it is the same animal. If you raise a row, he will get out by saying it was not himself who made the bargain with you, but his brother, who went out in the country this morning. They have always got a brother to shift the responsibility upon. A victim said to one of these fellows one day, "But I know I hired the horse of you, because I noticed that scar on your cheek." The reply was not bad. "Oh, yes, yes, my brother all same. We twins." A friend of mine, J. Smith, hired a horse yesterday, the Kanaka warranting him to be in excellent condition. Smith had a saddle and blanket of his own, and he ordered the Kanakas to put these on the horse. The Kanaka protested that he was perfectly willing to trust the gentleman with the saddle that was already on the animal, but Smith refused to use it. The change was made, then Smith noticed that the Kanaka had only changed the saddles, and had left the original blanket on the horse. He said he forgot to change the blankets, and so, to cut the bother short, Smith mounted and rode away. The horse went lame a mile from town, and afterward got to cutting up some extraordinary capers. Smith got down and took off the saddle, but the blanket stuck fast to the horse, glued to a procession of raw sores. The Kanaka's mysterious conduct stood explained. Another friend of mine bought a pretty good horse from a native a day or two ago, after a tolerably thorough examination of the animal. He discovered to-day that the horse was as blind as a bat in one eye. He meant to have examined that eye, and came home with a general notion that he had done it, but he remembers now that every time he made the attempt his attention was called to something else by his victimizer. One more yarn, and then I will pass to something else. I am informed that when Leland was here he bought a pair of very respectable-looking match horses from a native. They were in a little stable with a partition through the middle of it, one horse in each apartment. Leland examined one of them critically through a window, the Kanaka's brother having gone to the country with the key, and then went around the house and examined the other through a window on the other side. He said it was the neatest match he had ever seen, and paid for the horses on the spot. Whereupon the Kanaka departed to join his brother in the country. The scoundrel had shamefully swindled Leland. There was only one match horse, and he had examined his starboard side through one window and his port side through another. I decline to believe this story, but I give it because it is worth something as a fanciful illustration of a fixed fact, namely, that the Kanaka horse jockey is fertile in invention and elastic in conscience. Honolulu prices for horseflesh. You can buy a pretty good horse for $40 or $50, and a good enough horse for all practical purposes for $2.50. I estimate Oahu to be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 cents. A good deal better animal than he is was sold here day before yesterday for $1.06, and sold again today for $2.25. Brown bought a handsome and lively little pony yesterday for $10, and about the best common horse on the island, and he is a really good one, sold yesterday with good Mexican saddle and bridle for $70. A horse which is well and widely known, and greatly respected for his speed, good disposition, and everlasting bottom. You give your horse a little grain once a day. It comes from San Francisco, and is worth about 2 cents a pound, and you give him as much hay as he wants. It is cut and brought to the market by natives, and is not very good. It is baled into long round bundles about the size of a large man. One of them is stuck by the middle on each end of a 6-foot pole, and the Kanaka shoulders the pole and walks about the streets between the upright bales in search of customers. These hay bales thus carried have a general resemblance to a colossal capital H. These hay bundles cost 25 cents apiece, and one will last a horse about a day. You can get a horse for a song, a week's hay for another song, and you can turn your animal loose among the luxuriant grass in your neighbor's broad front yard without a song at all. You do it at midnight, and stable the beast again before morning. You have been at no expense thus far, but when you come to buy a saddle and bridle, they will cost you from $20 to $35. You can hire a horse, saddle and bridle, at from $7 to $10 a week, and the owner will take care of them at his own expense. Well, Oahu worried along over a smooth, hard road, bordered on either side by cottages at intervals, pulu swamps at intervals, fish ponds at intervals, but through a dead-level country all the time, and no trees to hide the wide Pacific Ocean on the right, or the rugged, towering rampart of solid rock called Diamond Head or Diamond Point straight ahead. The King's Grove, Waikiki. A mile and a half from town I came to a grove of tall cocoanut trees with clean, branchless stems reaching straight up 60 or 70 feet, and topped with a spray of green foliage sheltering clusters of cocoanuts. Not more picturesque than a forest of colossal ragged parasols with bunches of magnified grapes under them would be. About a dozen cottages, some frame and the others of native grass, nestled sleepily in the shade here and there. The grass cabins are of a grayish color, are shaped much like our own cottages, only with higher and steeper roofs usually, and are made of some kind of weed strongly bound together in bundles. The roofs are very thick, and so are the walls. The latter have square holes in them for windows. At a little distance these cabins have a furry appearance, as if they might be made of bear skins. They are very cool and pleasant inside. The King's flag was flying from the roof of one of the cottages, and His Majesty was probably within. He owns the whole concern thereabouts, and passes his time there frequently, on sultry days, laying off. The spot is called the King's Grove. Ruins of an ancient heathen temple. Near by is an interesting ruin, the meager remains of an ancient heathen temple, a place where human sacrifices were offered up in those old bygone days when the simple child of nature, yielding momentarily to sin when sorely tempted, acknowledged his error when calm reflection had shown it to him, and came forward with noble frankness and offered up his grandmother as an atoning sacrifice, in those old days when the luckless sinner could keep on cleansing his conscience and achieving periodical happiness as long as his relations held out, long, long before the missionaries braved 1,000 privations to come and make them permanently miserable by telling them how beautiful and how blissful a place heaven is, and how nearly impossible it is to get there, and showed the poor native how dreary a place perdition is, and what unnecessarily liberal facilities there are for going to it; showed him how, in his ignorance, he had gone and fooled away all his kinfolks to no purpose; showed him what rapture it is to work all day long for 50 cents to buy food for next day with, as compared with fishing for pastime and lolling in the shade through eternal summer, and eating of the bounty that nobody labored to provide but nature. How sad it is to think of the multitudes who have gone to their graves in this beautiful island and never knew there was a hell. And it inclines right-thinking people to weep rather than to laugh when he reflects how surprised they must have been when they got there. This ancient temple was built of rough blocks of lava, and was simply a roofless enclosure 130 feet long and 70 wide, nothing but naked walls, very thick but not much higher than a man's head. They will last for ages, no doubt, if left unmolested. Its 3 altars and other sacred appurtenances have crumbled and passed away years ago. It is said that in the old times thousands of human beings were slaughtered here in the presence of multitudes of naked, whooping, and howling savages. If these mute stones could speak, what tales they could tell, what pictures they could describe, of fettered victims, writhing and shrieking under the knife, of dense masses of dusky forms straining forward out of the gloom, with eager and ferocious faces lit up with the weird light of sacrificial fires, of the vague background of ghostly trees, of the mournful sea washing the dim shore, of the dark pyramid of Diamond Head standing sentinel over the dismal scene, and the peaceful moon looking calmly down upon it through rifts in the drifting clouds. When Kamehameha, pronounced Ka-me-ha-me-ah, the Great, who was a very Napoleon in military genius and uniform success, invaded this island of Oahu 3/4 of a century ago, and exterminated the army sent to oppose him, and took full and final possession of the country, he searched out the dead body of the King of Oahu, and those of the principal chiefs, and impaled their heads upon the walls of this temple. Those were savage times when this old slaughter-house was in its prime. The King and the chiefs ruled the common herd with a rod of iron, made them gather all the provisions the masters needed, built all the houses and temples, stand all the expenses of whatever kind, take kicks and cuffs for thanks, drag out lives well flavored with misery, and then suffer death for trifling offenses, or yield up their lives on the sacrificial altars to purchase favors from the gods for their hard rulers. The missionaries have clothed them, educated them, broken up the tyrannous authority of their chiefs, and given them freedom and the right to enjoy whatever the labor of their hand and brains produces, with equal laws for all and punishment for all alike who transgress them. The contrast is so strong, the wonderful benefit conferred upon this people by the missionaries is so prominent, so palpable, and so unquestionable, that the frankest compliment I can pay them, and the best, is simply to point to the condition of the Sandwich Islanders of Captain Cook's time and their condition today. Their work speaks for itself. The little collection of cottages, of which I was speaking a while ago, under the cocoanut trees, is a historical point. It is the village of Waikiki, usually pronounced Wai-ki-kai. once the capital of the kingdom and the abode of the great Kamehameha I. In 1801, while he lay encamped at this place with 7,000 men, preparing to invade the island of Kauai, he had previously captured and subdued the 7 other inhabited islands of the group, one after another. A pestilence broke out in Oahu, and raged with great virulence. It attacked the King's army and made great havoc in it. It is said that 300 bodies were washed out to sea in one day. There is an opening in the coral reef at this point, and an anchorage inside for a small number of vessels, though one accustomed to the great Bay of San Francisco would never take this little belt of smooth water with its border of foaming surf to be a harbor, save for Whitehall boats or something of that kind. But harbors are scarce in these islands. Open roadsteads are the rule here. The harbor of Waikiki was discovered in 1786, 7 or 8 years after Captain Cook's murder, by Captains Portlock and Dixon, in the ships King George and Queen Charlotte, the first English vessels that visited the islands after that unhappy occurrence. This little bathing tub of smooth water possesses some further historical interest as being the spot where the distinguished navigator Vancouver landed when he came here in 1792. In a conversation with a gentleman today about the scarcity of harbors among the islands, and in all the islands of the South Pacific, he said the natives of Tahiti have a theory that the reason why there are harbors wherever fresh water streams empty into the sea, and none elsewhere, is that the fresh water kills the coral insect, or so discommodes or disgusts it that it will not build its stony wall in its vicinity, and instanced what is claimed as fact, viz., that the break in the reef is always found where the fresh water passes over it, in support of this theory. This notable equestrian excursion will be concluded in my next, if nothing happens. Mark Twain. The Sacramento Daily Union, April 24, 1866. Honolulu, March, 1866. The equestrian excursion concluded. I wandered along the sea beach on my steed Oahu around the base of the extinct crater of Leahi, or Diamond Head, and a quarter of a mile beyond the point I overtook the party of ladies and gentlemen and assumed my proper place, that is, in the rear, for the horse I ride always persists in remaining in the rear in spite of kicks, cuffs, and curses. I was satisfied as long as I could keep Oahu within hailing distance of the cavalcade. I knew I could accomplish nothing better, even if Oahu were Norfolk himself. We went on, a great deal too far, I thought, for people who were unaccustomed to riding on horseback, and who must expect to suffer on the morrow if they indulged too freely in this sort of exercise. Finally we got to a point which we were expecting to go around in order to strike an easy road home. But we were too late. It was full tide and the sea had closed in on the shore. Young Henry McFarlane said he knew a nice comfortable route over the hill, a short cut, and the crowd dropped into his wake. We climbed a hill 150 feet high, and about as straight up and down as the side of a house, and as full of rough lava blocks as it could stick, not as wide perhaps as the broad road that leads to destruction, but nearly as dangerous to travel, and apparently leading in the same general direction. I felt for the ladies, but I had no time to speak any words of sympathy, by reason of my attention being so much occupied by Oahu. The place was so steep that at times he stood straight up on his tiptoes and clung by his forward toe-nails, with his back to the Pacific Ocean and his nose close to the moon, and thus situated we formed an equestrian picture which was as uncomfortable to me as it may have been picturesque to the spectators. You may think I was afraid, but I was not. I knew I could stay on him as long as his ears did not pull out. It was a great relief to me to know that we were all safe and sound on the summit at last, because the sun was just disappearing in the waves, night was abroad in the land, candles and lamps were already twinkling in the distant town, and we gratefully reflected that Henry had saved us from having to go back around the rocky sandy beach. But a new trouble arose while the party were admiring the rising moon and the cool, balmy night breeze, with its odor of countless flowers, for it was discovered that we had got into a place we could not get out of. we were apparently surrounded by precipices. Our pilot's chart was at fault, and he could not extricate us, and so we had the prospect before us of either spending the night in the admired night breeze under the admired moon, or of clambering down the way we came, in the dark. However, a Kanaka came along presently and found a first-rate road for us down an almost imperceptible decline, and the party set out on a cheerful gallop again, and Oahu struck up his miraculous canter once more. The moon rose up and flooded mountain and valley and ocean with silvery light, and I was not sorry we had lately been in trouble, because the consciousness of being safe again raised our spirits and made us more capable of enjoying the beautiful scene than we would have been otherwise. I never breathed such a soft, delicious atmosphere before, nor one freighted with such rich fragrance. A barber shop is nothing to it. Battleground whose history is forgotten. Gaily laughing and talking, the party galloped on, and with set teeth and bouncing body I clung to the pommel and cantered after. Presently we came to a place where no grass grew, a wide expanse of deep sand. They said it was an old battle-ground. All around, everywhere, not 3 feet apart, the bleached bones of men gleamed white in the moonlight. We picked up a lot of them for mementos. I got quite a number of arm bones and leg bones, of great chiefs, maybe, who had fought savagely in that fearful battle in the old days when blood flowed like wine where we now stood, and wore the choicest of them out on Oahu afterward, trying to make him go. All sorts of bones could be found except skulls, but a citizen said irreverently that there had been an unusual number of skull hunters there lately, a species of sportsmen I had never heard of before. The conversation at this point took a unique and ghastly turn. A gentleman said, "Give me some of your bones, Miss Blank, I'll carry them for you." Another said, "You haven't got bones enough, Mrs. Blank, here's a good shin bone if you want it." Such observations as these fell from the lips of ladies with reference to their queer newly acquired property. "Mr. Brown, will you please hold some of my bones for me a minute?" And, "Mr. Smith, you have got some of my bones, and you have got one, too, Mr. Jones, and you have got my spine, Mr. Twain. Now don't any of you gentlemen get my bones all mixed up with yours, so that you can't tell them apart." These remarks look very irreverent on paper, but they did not sound so, being used merely in a business way, and with no intention of making sport of the remains. I did not think it was just right to carry off any of these bones, but we did it anyhow. We considered that it was at least as right as it is for the Hawaiian government and the city of Honolulu, which is the most excessively moral and religious town that can be found on the map of the world, to permit those remains to lie decade after decade, to bleach and rot in sun and wind and suffer desecration by careless strangers and by the beasts of the field, unprotected by even a worm fence. Call us hard names if you will, you statesmen and missionaries, but I say shame upon you that after raising a nation from idolatry to Christianity, and from barbarism to civilization, you have not taught it the comment of respect for the dead. Your work is incomplete. Legendary. Nothing whatever is known about this place. Its story is a secret that will never be revealed. The oldest natives make no pretense of being possessed of its history. They say these bones were here when they were children. They were here when their grandfathers were children, and how they came here they can only conjecture. Many people believe this spot to be an ancient battleground, and it is usual to call it so, and they believe that these skeletons have lain for ages just where their proprietors fell in the great fight. Other people believe that Kamehameha I fought his first battle here. On this point I have heard a story which may have been taken from one of the numerous books which have been written concerning these islands. I do not know where the narrator got it. He said that when Kamehameha, who was at first merely a subordinate chief on the island of Hawaii, landed here, he brought a large army with him and encamped at Waikiki. The Oahuans marched against him, and so confident were they of success that they readily acceded to a demand of their priests that they should draw a line where their bones now lie, and take an oath that, if forced to retreat at all, They would never retreat beyond this boundary. The priests told them that death and everlasting punishment would overtake any who violated the oath, and the march was resumed. Kamehameha drove them back step by step. The priests fought in the front rank and exhorted them both by voice and inspired example to remember their oath, to die if need be, but never cross the fatal line. The struggle was manfully maintained, but at last the chief priest fell, pierced to the heart with a spear, and the unlucky omen fell like a blight upon the brave souls at his back. With a triumphant shout the invaders pressed forward, the line was crossed, the offended gods deserted the despairing army, and accepting the doom their perjury had brought upon them, they broke and fled over the plain where Honolulu stands now, up the beautiful Nuuanu Valley, paused a moment, hemmed in by precipitous mountains on either hand, and the frightful precipice of the Pali, pronounced Pali. Intelligent natives claim that there is no R in the Kanaka alphabet, in front, and then were driven over, a sheer plunge of 600 feet. The story is pretty enough, but Mr. Jarvis's excellent history says that the Oahuans were entrenched in Nuuanu Valley, that Kamehameha ousted them, routed them, pursued them up the valley, and drove them over the precipice. He makes no mention of our boneyard at all in his book. There was a terrible pestilence here in 1804, which killed great numbers of the inhabitants, and the natives have legends of others that swept the islands long before that, and therefore many persons now believe that these bones belong to victims of one of these epidemics who were hastily buried in a great pit. It is by far the most reasonable conjecture, because Jarvis says that the weapons of the islanders were so rude and inefficient that their battles were not often very bloody. If this was a battle it was astonishingly deadly, for in spite of the depredations of skull hunters, we rode a considerable distance over ground so thickly strewn with human bones that the horses' feet crushed them, not occasionally, but at every step. Sentiment. Impressed by the profound silence and repose that rested over the beautiful landscape, and being, as usual, in the rear, I gave voice to my thought. I said, "What a picture is here slumbering in the solemn glory of the moon! How strong the rugged outlines of the dead volcano stand out against the clear sky! What a snowy fringe marks the bursting of the surf over the long curved reef! How calmly the dim city sleeps yonder in the plain! How soft the shadows lie upon the stately mountains that border the dream-haunted Manoa Valley! What a grand pyramid of billowy clouds towers above the storied Pali! How the grim warriors of the past seem flocking in ghostly squadrons to their ancient battlefield again! How the wails of the dying well up from the—" At this point the horse called Oahu deliberately sat down in the sand. Sat down to listen, I suppose. Never mind what he heard. I stopped apostrophizing, and convinced him that I was not a man to allow contempt of court on the part of a horse. I broke the backbone of a chief over his rump, and set out to join the cavalcade again. Very considerably fagged out, we arrived in town at 9 o'clock at night, myself in the lead, for when my horse finally came to understand that he was homeward bound and hadn't far to go, he threw his legs wildly out before and behind him, depressed his head and laid his ears back, and flew by the admiring company like a telegram. In 5 minutes he was far away ahead of everybody. We stopped in front of a private residence, Brown and I did, to wait for the rest and see that none were lost. I soon saw that I had attracted the attention of a comely young girl, and I felt duly flattered. Perhaps, thought I, she admires my horsemanship, and I made a savage jerk at the bridle and said, "Ho, will you?" to show how fierce and unmanageable the beast was, though, to say truly, he was leaning up against a hitching-post peaceably enough at the time. I stirred Oahu up and moved him about, and went up the street a short distance to look for the party, and loped gallantly back again, all the while making a pretense of being unconscious that I was an object of interest. I then addressed a few pert remarks to Brown, to give the young lady a chance to admire my style of conversation, and was gratified to see her step up and whisper to Brown, and glance furtively at me at the same time. I could see that her gentle face bore an expression of the most kindly and earnest solicitude, and I was shocked and angered to hear Brown burst into a fit of brutal laughter. As soon as we started home I asked with a fair show of indifference what she had been saying. Brown laughed again and said, "She thought, from the slouchy way you rode, and the way you drawled out your words, that you was drunk. She said, 'Why don't you take the poor creature home, Mr. Brown? It makes me nervous to see him galloping that horse and just hanging on that way, and he so drunk.'" I laughed very loudly at the joke, but it was a sort of hollow, sepulchral laugh, after all, and then I took it out of Oahu. An old acquaintance. I have found an old acquaintance here, Reverend Franklin S. Rising, of the Episcopal minister, who has had charge of a church in Virginia, Nevada, for several years, and who is well known in Sacramento and San Francisco. He sprained his knee in September last, and is here for his health. He thinks he has made no progress worth mentioning towards regaining it, but I think differently. He can ride on horseback, and is able to walk a few steps without his crutches, things he could not do a week ago. While we were marching through Georgia. The popular song nuisance follows us here. In San Francisco it used to be, "Just before the battle, mother," every night and all night long. Then it was, "When Johnny comes marching home." After that it was, "Wearin' of the Green," and last and most dreadful of all came that calamity of "When we were marching through Georgia." It was the last thing I heard when the ship sailed, and it gratified me to think I should hear it no more for months. And now, here at dead of night, at the very outpost and fag end of the world, on a little rock in the middle of a limitless ocean, a pack of dark-skinned savages are tramping down the street singing it with a vim and an energy that make my hair rise. Singing it in their own barbarous tongue. They have got the tune to perfection. Otherwise I never would have suspected that Waikiki Lantani Oi Kai Holy Holy Wahoo means "when we were marching through Georgia." If it would have been all the same to General Sherman, I wish he had gone around by the way of the Gulf of Mexico instead of marching through Georgia. Mark Twain. End of Section 49.